They shot the human trainee. 3 rounds. Center mass. He didn't even scream. 23 seconds later, the door to Observation Bay 7 blew open, and she walked out. Covered in his blood. Holding his HFY. Nobody in that station had ever seen a human move like that. Not until that night. Let me take you back. 2 hours earlier. Kestrel Station orbited a dead moon on the edge of Volari space, a joint training post where 3 species learned to fight side by side, or pretended to. Cadet Ronan Voss was the only human in his cohort. 19 years old. Skinny. Quiet. The kind of quiet that made the other trainees nervous, because they couldn't read it. The Volari couldn't read humans at all. That was the problem. Instructor Sila Kren, a Volari war veteran with silver eyes and 0 patience, had one rule for her trainees: obedience above instinct. Ronan broke that rule on his very first day. During a live-fire simulation, he pulled his squad out of formation, against direct orders, 3 seconds before a plasma charge would have killed them all. He was right. He was also insubordinate. And the Volari command structure does not forgive insubordination. Not even when it saves lives. That single decision put a target on his back that nobody warned him about. You'd think saving your squad earns respect. On Kestrel Station, it earned him a file. A file that got quietly passed up the chain, past Kren, past the training board, straight to someone who had a very different plan for the boy who broke formation. Because Ronan wasn't just skinny and quiet. He was fast. Unnervingly fast. Faster than the simulators could properly track. And there is one thing the Volari fear more than defeat. They fear what they cannot predict. 3 weeks into training, Ronan started noticing things. Guards posted outside his bunk that weren't there before. Sudden schedule changes. A trainer named Darsk who watched him a little too long during sparring drills. He said nothing. He just kept training. Harder. Every night, alone in the sparring hall after lights out, he ran the same drill until his knuckles split. He didn't know yet what he was preparing for. He just knew, somewhere in his gut, that he was running out of time. That gut feeling was correct. On the night everything changed, Ronan was called to Observation Bay 7. Alone. No explanation given. That should have been the first red flag. He walked in anyway. Because refusing an order on Kestrel Station was its own kind of death sentence. Waiting for him were 3 Volari enforcers. Not instructors. Enforcers, the kind who don't ask questions, they just carry out decisions already made above their heads. Ronan barely got a word out. Cadet Voss. Compliance protocol, one of them said. And that was the only warning he got. 3 shots. Center mass. He hit the ground before the echo even faded. Silence in the bay. The kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. But here's what those enforcers didn't know. What almost nobody on that station knew. Ronan wasn't training alone every night for no reason. He was training with someone. Her name was Lyra Osei. 26 years old. Former human military, the kind of soldier whose service record gets classified the moment it ends. Officially, she was a cultural liaison assigned to the human trainee program. Unofficially, she was Ronan's shadow. His protector. The one person in that entire station who understood exactly what he was, and exactly what he was capable of. She wasn't supposed to be near Observation Bay 7 that night. She was there anyway. Because something in her had felt wrong all day. She heard the shots from 2 corridors away. And in that instant, something in Lyra Osei went very, very quiet. Not panic. Not fear. Something colder. She didn't run toward the sound like most people would. She moved toward it with total, terrifying control. 23 seconds. That's how long it took her to cross 2 corridors, breach a sealed door, and end 3 trained enforcers. 23 seconds is nothing. 23 seconds is an eternity, depending on which side of the door you're standing on. The enforcers had their weapon still raised when she came through. They didn't even get to turn fully around. Because Lyra Osei didn't come through that door with a weapon issued by Kestrel Station. She came through with Ronan's blade. The one he called his HFY. It wasn't a name given by command. It was a nickname Ronan gave it himself, half joking, the first day she trained him with it. A private joke between the two of them that nobody else on that station ever understood. By the time backup arrived, all three enforcers were down. And Lyra was on her knees beside Ronan, pressing both hands against his chest, blood soaking through her uniform to the skin. He was still breathing. Barely. That detail matters. Remember that detail. Because when she finally stood up, when she walked out of that bay in full view of the entire hallway, she wasn't just covered in blood for show. She was covered in blood because she had just spent every second of those 23 seconds doing two things at once. Ending 3 lives. And keeping one alive. The hallway went dead silent when she stepped out. Trainees from every squad had gathered by then, drawn by the sound of the breach. Valari, Zenthai, a scattering of other species, none of them had ever seen a human like this. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She held the blade loosely in one hand, point down, blood dripping steadily onto the floor plating. In her other arm, she carried Ronan, carried him, not dragged him, like his weight was nothing at all. Command finally arrived for minutes too late to matter. Senior Officer Threl Vantus, the one who had quietly signed off on the compliance protocol in the first place, stepped off the lift expecting a clean, contained incident. What he got instead was a hallway full of witnesses. And a human standing in the middle of it holding evidence that could end his career. His mistake wasn't ordering the hit. His mistake was thinking nobody would survive to talk about it. Lyra looked at him. Just looked. And that look said more than any threat could have. "You'll want to review the footage from Bay 7, she said, voice flat, almost bored. Carefully. Before you decide what story you're telling command. Vantos's confidence cracked, just slightly, right there in front of everyone. Because here's the thing about Kestrel Station. Every corridor, every bay, every training room, recorded. Always. No exceptions. He'd ordered an off-book execution in one of the most heavily surveilled rooms on the entire station. Arrogance does that. It makes you forget the very systems you built to control everyone else. Within the hour, that footage was already being pulled by station oversight. Not because anyone suddenly cared about a human cadet's life. But because 3 trained Valari enforcers were dead, and somebody needed answers fast. The footage showed everything. The unprovoked shots. The 3 seconds of hesitation before Lyra breached the door. The 23 seconds that followed. And it showed something else. Something that made even the oversight committee go quiet. It showed exactly how she moved. Not frantic. Not lucky. Precise, in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd done something like it. Not by a long shot. That's when people started asking a much more dangerous question. Who exactly was Lyra Osei, before Kestrel Station? Her official file said cultural liaison. 3 years of it. Clean record, no incidents, nothing remarkable. But the movement in that footage didn't belong to a liaison. It belonged to someone who had killed before, and killed often enough that her body didn't even need to think about it anymore. Command pulled deeper records. Most of it came back redacted. What little wasn't redacted was enough to make Vantus regret every decision he'd made that week. Before Kestrel, Lyra Osei had served in a joint special operations unit during the Belt conflict, one of the few human-only units that other species refused to fight alongside, because the casualty numbers she left behind didn't look like ordinary warfare. They looked like something else entirely. She'd been quietly reassigned after the conflict ended. Not punished. Reassigned. Because command back home didn't know what to do with someone like her in peacetime. So they gave her a soft title, a quiet post, and told her to watch over a group of new human trainees on a station far from anywhere that mattered. They thought they were retiring her. They were wrong. Meanwhile, Ronan was rushed to the med bay, still holding on by a thread. 3 shots, center mass. By any normal measure, he shouldn't have survived the walk out of that bay, let alone the hour after. But there was one more detail in his file that Vantus had conveniently ignored when he ordered the hit. Ronan wasn't just fast. His physiology had been flagged during intake as anomalous resilience, a polite, clinical way of saying his body didn't break the way theirs expected it to. It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was the simple, uncomfortable truth that humans had adapted to violence for longer, and harder, than almost anyone else in that sector had bothered to study. The Valari built an empire on discipline and hierarchy. Humans built survival on stubbornness. And stubbornness, it turns out, doesn't care how many rounds you put into it. By morning, Ronan was stable. Unconscious, but stable. The med staff called it a miracle. Lyra called it Tuesday. She never left his side. Not for command's questioning, not for the mandatory debrief, not even when Vantus himself came down to personally apologize for what he called an unfortunate miscommunication. She let him talk. She let him finish his careful, rehearsed little speech. Then she said 4 words that ended up in every incident report filed that week. 23 seconds, Vantus. He didn't understand at first. That's how long it took me to reach him, she continued. Next time, it'll be less. There was no next time. Not for Vantus, anyway. Within 72 hours, station oversight relieved him of command pending a full investigation, not out of mercy for Ronan, but because 3 dead enforcers and 1 furious former Special Ops soldier were the kind of headline nobody wanted attached to their command record. Justice on Kestrel Station rarely comes from morality. It comes from liability. But for once, liability worked in the right direction. Ronan woke up 4 days later. First words out of his mouth weren't about the pain, or the shooting, or even Vantus. He asked where his blade was. Lyra was sitting beside his bed, exactly where she'd been for 4 straight days, refusing every order to rest. She placed the HFY on the table beside him without a word. Still stained. She hadn't cleaned it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her. You used it, he said quietly. You'd have done the same for me, she said. And that, more than the footage, more than the investigation, more than anything Vantus or Command or the entire Valari hierarchy said afterward, was the part of the story that spread through Kestrel Station the fastest. Not the violence. Not the 23 seconds. The loyalty underneath it. Because word got around fast in a place like that. And what stuck with people wasn't just that a human soldier had ended 3 trained enforcers in under half a minute. It was that she hadn't hesitated. Not for a second. Not to consider the consequences, not to weigh her career, not to think about what Command would say. She heard the shots. And she moved. Other species on that station had entire doctrines built around calculated response, chain of command, permission before action. Humans, apparently, had something else built into them. Something older. Something that didn't ask for permission when someone they cared about was dying behind a locked door. The Valari have a word for soldiers who fight for orders. They don't really have a word for soldiers who fight for people. They do now. Ronan recovered fully within 3 weeks, faster than the med staff predicted, though by that point, almost nothing about him surprised them anymore. He went back to training. Same sparring hall. Same late nights. Same blade. But something had shifted in how the other trainees looked at him. Not fear, exactly. Something closer to caution mixed with respect. Nobody broke formation to save him again. They didn't need to. Because now every single one of them understood something Vantus had learned far too late. You don't shoot the quiet one. You don't touch what he protects. And you absolutely, under no circumstances, make his people move. Because when they move, they don't stop at 3 seconds. They don't stop at 3 enforcers. They stop when it's over. Not a moment before. Instructor Kren, the one who'd first flagged Ronan's insubordination, requested a transfer to oversee his training personally after the incident. Not as punishment. As an apology, in the only language the Valari really understand, action. She never said it outright. She didn't have to. She simply started training him the way he deserved from day one. As a soldier worth protecting, not a variable worth eliminating. Lyra stayed on as his liaison, officially. Unofficially, everyone on that station now understood exactly what her real job was. She wasn't there to teach humans how to fit into the Valari system. She was there to make sure nobody in that system ever made the mistake of testing them again. And somewhere in the lower decks of Kestrel Station, in a training log nobody was supposed to read, a single line got added beneath Ronan Voss's file. Anomalous resilience, confirmed. Support system, also anomalous. Recommend extreme caution. They shot the human trainee. 23 seconds later, she walked out covered in his blood, holding his HFY. And every single species on that station learned, all at once, exactly what happens when you underestimate what humans are willing to do for each other. They never made that mistake again.